Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I can see a few people are starting to join. If you could just pop into the chat where you are from and what your role is within your setting, that would be great. So I can get an idea of who's here and where you're all from. So just pop that into the chat now and we'll have a quick look. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes once we've got a few more people joined. So just pop into the chat where you're from and super, thank you. Excellent. Right, let's have a look then. Oh, hello, Marion. How are you? Lovely to see you. Well, not to see you as such. Brilliant. Thank you. Just pop in as you're joining, just pop into the chat where you're from, what languages you speak, what your role is within your setting. And we'll just wait for another couple of minutes for everyone to join. Lovely. Right. Who have we got? Super. Yes, Marion's been able to go for a lovely swim and just put lunch on. Yeah, it's much more relaxed doing a conference online, isn't it? Hi, Cecilia. Cecilia's from Birmingham, teaches Spanish at a primary school. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Right. So as you're joining, just pop into the chat box where you're from and what language you teach and what your role is within your setting. And then we will get started probably in another couple of minutes just to give everybody time. It's a bit difficult to know how many people should be here. I think there should be about 100 people according to the bookmarks, but I don't think everybody will be attending live. Some people will be attending afterwards. Lovely. Right, so we are just after 12 o'clock now. So good morning, everyone. We'll get started. People will drift in, I'm sure, as time goes on, but just very quickly before we get started, to ask you if you have any questions as I'm going through today's presentation that you want to raise, just pop them into the Q&A section. So you should see on your screen that as well as the chat, there is a Q&A icon that you can click on. And that's where we're going to do questions and answers rather than in the chat, because sometimes in the chat things can get a little bit lost. I will check the chat as well at the end, but if you do have any questions, try and pop them into the Q&A area rather than into the chat if possible. Morning, Ruth. Ruth is from Gloucestershire, from Leicester originally. That's where I am. Fabulous. I teach Arabic and run multilingual creative writing workshops in local primaries. That sounds amazing. Fabulous. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Right, I'm going to get started and I'll remind people about the Q&A part at the end. So the session this morning is going to run for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions at the end. And yeah, just pop the questions into the Q&A section as I go. You don't have to wait until the end to do it, and then I will read through them. So good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Well, it's afternoon now, isn't it, really? It's lovely to see some familiar names in the list of participants, and welcome to everybody who I've not had the opportunity to meet before at conferences around languages, etc. My name's Ellie. My details are on the screen just here, Twitter and email, and the address of my blog. I am a primary qualified teacher, but I currently teach as a French teacher, specialist French teacher, and languages and international lead at Hazel Community Primary School, which is a multilingual community right in the centre of Leicester. And I'm very, very lucky to work there with a fantastic team of people who are really supportive of languages and the international dimension of the curriculum, which is my sort of remit. I teach French to all of Key Stage 2 as a specialist teacher, and I lead on the international dimension of the curriculum. And I'm going to mention parts of that today during my talk. I do have a degree in French and Hispanic studies, but I've never taught in secondary, so I'm very, very much a primary specialist, and I really enjoy the way in which primary languages can become such a cross-curricular affair in primary schools, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on as well. During this session, I'm going to present to you my thoughts on the movement to decolonise the curriculum for MFL. Really decolonising the curriculum from an MFL perspective, really. And that's going to include considering what a decolonised curriculum might look like in terms of languages provision, offering practical advice and strategies for moving away from a Eurocentric focus in terms of teaching and learning. And I'll also be signposting a range of resources and sources of support, which may be of use to those of you who are on the path to decolonising your own curriculum in your own settings. So before we start, I'm going to say something which may cause me essentially to invalidate everything that I'm about to say over the next 40 minutes or so, but I'm not an expert on decolonising the curriculum. And I say that really because as a white middle-class woman, I have to be very conscious every day that my lived experience is not the same as somebody who, for example, is not white. And this is a really great visual on screen now that I saw Hannah White use at the Association for Languages, a Language Learning Primary Forum meeting quite a long time ago now. And I think it's a really nice place to start when considering our own privilege and as a result, the potential bias that we might carry with us and make ourselves aware of that. So as a result of my skin colour or my education or my neurodiversity, for example, I have to question everything that I think I know and interrogate my unconscious bias that's developed, of course, as a result of my education in the British state system. And my experiences and my social and cultural constructs have all been created around me since my birth, and I have to be aware of that. But that said, I'm a really, really firm believer that education is the only way to ensure that future generations don't continue to exist within what Aníbal Quijano describes as the colonial matrix of power, which is essentially where colonial legacies continue to dominate the structures of power and control, as well as systems of knowledge in the post-colonial world that we live in. So I'm going to start off with a little story to illustrate that, really. It sort of illustrates, I guess, what we call the kind of discrimination against certain forms of knowledge based on, for example, race or ethnicity. And it can really impact on a child growing up in a formal colonial power. Because that's what Britain is, of course, as many of us have done, and as the children that we're teaching currently are doing. So back in 2012, I was really, really early on in my teaching career, just a couple of years in, and I watched a programme called Andrew Marr's History of the World, and it was on BBC, and the aim of the series was really to tell the story of the entirety of human history, starting with the migration of early Homo sapiens out of Africa and ending in the present day. So it had quite a big aim. But what stuck with me most about that series was that it featured a section on the Haitian Revolution of 1791. And the Haitian Revolution was a moment in time that saw the enslaved population of Saint-Domingue, which is what Haiti was called at the time. It was a very, very, very profitable colony for the French. So in Saint-Domingue, the enslaved people, many of whom had come from Africa, they weren't the ancestors of Africans, they actually had been born in Africa. they rose up against their slave owners, and they took on the colonial might of not just France, but also Britain and Spain. And by 1804, these enslaved Africans had won their independence from France, although they would still be paying reparations to the their former colonizers for the theft, quote unquote, of slave owner property, quote unquote, until as recently as 1947, which I think is incredibly shocking. And this therefore made Haiti the first republic led by Black people, and effectively signaled the beginning of the end for the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans. And it's arguably the most significant revolution of the period, in the sense that it not only secured freedom from colonial rule, but it also ensured freedom from slavery for its people. And this is a period of time when lots of revolutions are happening all over the world. And what really struck me about this was one question: why is it that I've never even heard of the Haitian Revolution? I'd done a degree in French and Hispanic studies. I'd studied history up to A-level. I had absolutely no idea that the Haitian Revolution had even happened. Why was it that, in spite of its profound impact on the world, I had no idea about it? So a little bit more research soon uncovered that this wasn't the only revolution that was happening in that part of the world at the time. There were others in Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados. Never heard of them again. So clearly there were gaps in my understanding of the long and complex histories of the major European powers and their interactions with their colonies. And so I needed to explore that a little bit further. I needed to find out more. So to get us thinking a little bit about this, and to get us thinking about what we know and what we think we know, I'm going to show you some pictures, and I'd like you to put into the chat what you think these images are representing. So what period of history is this picture representing? What is it? What's happening in this picture? If you can pop it into the chat nice and quickly, and then I'm going to have a look at some of the answers, and then we'll discuss a little bit about what this picture is actually showing us. Yep, so we've got Romans, brilliant. Where are these Romans? Any idea where they might be? Where are they? Yep, Romans on Hadrian's Wall, perfect, well done. Romans and Britons fighting them, yes, well done. Or most likely Picts, yeah, super. So this is an image of Hadrian's Wall, well done. It was built at the most northerly point of the Roman Empire in the northeast of England to protect the empire from the Picts, essentially, who lived further north and who the Romans were never able to successfully subdue. But what do we imagine when we think of a Roman soldier, or the Romans who were garrisoned along Hadrian's Wall, for example, during this period? I would suspect that most of us think of somebody who looks like they come from Southern Europe. But in fact, the Roman Empire was absolutely vast, and it spread as far south as North Africa, modern day Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria. And there is archaeological evidence of units of men garrisoned on Hadrian's Wall who were described in Latin as morum, Moors, or people from Africa. So we have proof that there were communities of North Africans here in Britain on Hadrian's Wall during the time of the Romans. So how would my child from Libya, for example, in my class feel if they had that information? Would it make their learning of history, for example, more inclusive? Okay, it's much, much more broad to think about the Romans, not just as people who came from Italy, but in fact, people who came from all over Europe and North Africa, because anybody who was conquered by the Romans became a Roman. So yeah, really interesting to think about who we're actually talking about when we're talking about the Romans. Okay, who's this? What's going on in this picture? Any ideas? Anyone recognise this from their history lessons? Let's see. Yes, well done. Jenna and vaccinations. Yes, when I was at school, when I was learning biology, we were told that Edward Jenner defeated the deadly smallpox virus through his discovery of the vaccine. Note the word discovery. And the story goes that in the 18th century, Edward Jenner, who was a British doctor, worked out that milkmaids, for some reason, didn't get struck down by smallpox. And he created a theory that this was because the milkmaids often contracted the much milder cowpox, which then gave them immunity from smallpox. And this led Jenner to then take pus from a cowpox blister and scratch it into the skin of his gardener's son, thereby exposing him to smallpox. Actually, the boy didn't get, giving him that virus and then exposing him to smallpox afterwards, and the boy then didn't get sick. So we're not going to go into the ethics of it now because it's obviously horrendous, but as the boy didn't contract smallpox, vaccinations or vaccines became a recognised way of protecting individuals against deadly viruses. But the truth is, in fact, the dangers of smallpox, which is a really horrendous disease, can leave you horribly disfigured and scarred, was known by the ancients. There are pockmarks found on Egyptian mummies, for example, and it was a global issue. And we now know that hundreds of years before Jenner even began thinking about this, there were communities in China and in India and in parts of Africa who were already practicing something called variolation, which basically involves putting pus or scabs of smallpox into the bodies of healthy people to protect them. And it was this knowledge that in 1721 enabled a minister called Cotton Mather in the United States to control a smallpox outbreak in Boston. And he did that with knowledge that was given to him by an enslaved African that he owned, who actually helped him to solve the issue, if you like. Okay, next and final one. What's going on here? Who's this person? What's going on? Oh, yes, that's brilliant, Marion. Yes, thank you. There's a really, really good blog, a really, really good book that Marion just popped into the chat. Fabulous. Who's this then, please? Good. Christopher Columbus, whatever we want to call him. Brilliant. Well done. Christopher Columbus discovering the Americas. Again, this word discovering. How can we discover a land where people are already living? It's impossible, of course. But we now know, of course, that Columbus was nowhere near the first person to travel to the Americas. There's evidence of the Vikings doing it. And interestingly, there's also an argument for an African presence in Mesoamerica, which is the area stretching from central Mexico down through Guatemala, Honduras, etc., down to Costa Rica. Archaeological evidence from the Olmec culture, which is existed in what is now southern Mexico, roughly 1200 BCE to 400 BCE, suggests that the Olmecs had contact with Africans who came to them across the Atlantic currents from West Africa. And there are examples of things called colossal heads, which archaeologists have suggested have African features. So, and there's certain cultural links as well, like mummification and the building of pyramids, for example, that have a lot of similarities and links with African practices as well. And if you're interested in that, there's a very interesting book called Ivan van Sertima, who wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus. That's a really interesting read from that point of view. So why am I talking about this? Because we're languages teachers. Surely we're not interested in history. Why should we be interested in what happened to Christopher Columbus or what the Romans were doing? Well, I've used these examples because they have really identify and really illustrate, if you like, what the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie calls the danger of a single story. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later. And she has a wonderful TED talk with the same title that you might want to check out as well. Because what we must do as educators in whatever subject we teach is to question if what we think we know is the actual story all the time. How has this narrative come to be? Could we examine it from another angle? And this, of course, means reading more around the subject and digging deeper rather than just accepting, if you like, the thing that we've always been told. And I think if we really want our curriculum to become truly decolonised, we really need to be engaged in this struggle over the dominant epistemology and traditions of thought, as Professor Sarah Nuttall puts it so clearly. We need to be engaged in that struggle. Otherwise, we're never, ever going to change anything. Now, the fact that the British education system is really quite selective when it comes to the history that it shares with its young people has been well known by the Black and minority ethnic community for decades. And this is because colonialism as a concept functions by creating systems of racialized hierarchies, including systems of knowledge and culture centered on Europe. And it's the very reason that many minority communities have very long histories of supplementary schools, which provide an alternative version of history, that's the history that's taught within the mainstream classroom. So for too long, our education system has really failed to tackle the very thorny issues surrounding colonialism, the violence inflicted on oppressed peoples, uncomfortable views on race and its impact, the impact it still has on Britain and the world today. The murder of George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter protests, which was seen around the world in the summer of 2020, have really reignited this debate about systemic racism, prejudice, and lack of representation, and how these still affect the lives of minority ethnic groups living in a post-colonial world. The problem is that often tokenistic gestures of diversity and multiculturalism take the place of actual concrete action to address the underlying issues that lead to lack of representation within the curriculum and within the education system as a whole. I was really shocked to find that in a 2021 survey, 85.7% of all teachers in state-funded English schools were white. And this is why I've mentioned moving beyond diversity in the title of this particular presentation, because the big issue with the concept of diversity is that it's based on the idea that there's a neutral point from which others are diverse, with the dominant aspect generally of this neutrality being whiteness, as Kavita Banot writes. So in order to move towards decolonisation, we need to ensure that we're not simply satisfied with ensuring that there are more black and brown faces in our textbooks and in the resources that we create, although this is important as well. Instead, we need to dig a little deeper and move away from what we might call more tokenistic elements of inclusion, and we'll explore what I mean by that later on. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be making every effort to ensure that our resources and the books that we read to our children, that they shouldn't reflect the multi-ethnic world that we live in. I've listed here, for example, sites where you can purchase some really fantastic books in French and Spanish and German, which feature children of colour, which is really, really important. And as well, there are some ideas for publications that we could add to the school library in terms of these Little People, Big Dreams books, which are really great ways to introduce children to different characters from history, different people from history who they might not have heard of. So that's a good place to start, isn't it? It's a good place to start to think about what we've got in our school libraries. But we also need to think, of course, about the images that we show during lessons. So this is a slide taken from a unit of work that I teach on sport. And it shows various different sports stars from around the world who have different ethnic backgrounds. And moving away from your own classroom, we also need to ensure that the rest of the school community reflects a commitment to representation, not just in the kind of books and resources that we offer, but also in what we see on displays around the school. This is an example of a timeline that I saw on Twitter that that doesn't really have even any women on it in terms of people who contributed to the timeline, let alone people who are not white. However, the concept of decolonising the curriculum goes further than simply ensuring visual representation in books and resources and displays around the school. It asks us to move away from what we think we know and to question things that we may have assumed were fact, and to move away, as I said, from that Eurocentric view of the world. So what does a truly decolonised curriculum look like? Well, I'm going to expose myself as a fraud again for the second time today, because I don't really know. I've never seen a perfect example in action. However, I do believe that there are several steps that we can take as languages teachers to create real and meaningful change to the languages curriculum, giving our pupils a more nuanced view of the world and opportunities to engage with language and culture, because these two are really intrinsically linked in a way that doesn't feed into traditional colonial and Eurocentric narratives. So for me personally, one of the first steps has been to re-examine the curriculum offer for my school. As languages teachers and leads, we are generally teaching children to speak European languages, usually French or Spanish or German. We very rarely teach community languages or other important world languages like Mandarin or Arabic, which actually have more speakers globally than say French, for those of us who teach French. So we need to be careful to ensure that we consider how we can help our children to explore the global nature of the languages studied. And critically, why those languages that developed in Europe and are now spoken by populations on other continents. So for those of us teaching French, it might be interesting to share with the children, for example, that there are more French speakers on the continent of Africa than there are in Europe. That's over 150 million as compared to just under 100 million in Europe. And in fact, there is potential by 2050 for Africa to account for 85% of the French-speaking world. And this is, of course, a direct result of France's colonial past. And we need to talk about that with children. And for Spanish teachers, there's a wonderful conversation to be had about why there are 20 countries on the other side of the Atlantic that all speak Spanish or have Spanish as their official language. So to help the children really appreciate French in our case, and a lot of the examples I'm going to give today are French, but they can be adapted for other languages, of course. To help the children appreciate French as a language spoken around the world, forging links with partner schools in different parts of the Francophone world, not just mainland France, has been really very important. And of course, this applies to Hispanists and Germanists too. And we've done this as a school in two different ways. First of all, through the British Council's Connecting Curriculum Pathway, which is a really straightforward way to find a partner school to work with on a particular project. And these projects are usually linked to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for anyone who's familiar with those. So for example, at the moment, our Year 5 are working with their partner school in Rwanda on the Zero Hunger Project, for which all of the resources are produced by the British Council and can be used. And it encourages children to explore the issues of hunger from multiple perspectives and consider possible solutions. And there are a range of projects that you can work on, and the British Council provides lots and lots of support with that. And it's the Connected Classrooms team that will find you your partner school according to the area of the world that you want to link with. And sadly, for those of us teaching Spanish, there is no link with South America or Central America at this time. But it's a really great option for schools that are looking to develop the global citizenship element of their curriculum by examining solutions to global issues. Now, I have to say that I am very lucky because my head teacher gives me protected international time, which is separate from French lessons, in which children are able to communicate with their partner schools. And all of Key Stage 2, each year group of Key Stage 2 has a partner school in somewhere in the Francophone world. So Year 3 have a link in Guadeloupe. Really interesting conversation because it's officially part of France, but it's the other side of the Atlantic. Year 4 have a link with Reunion Island, again part of France, but in a completely different part of the world. And Chad. Year 5 have a link with Rwanda, and Year 6 have a link with Senegal. So these are links that have been created over time and have allowed me to really deepen children's understanding of how to of the French-speaking world and the cultures of the French-speaking world. But if you want something that's a little bit more free and you want to kind of guide it yourself and you don't necessarily want to be involved in Sustainable Development Goals work, then the British Council Partner Finder tool is really, really helpful as well. You register for free online, and then you can quite simply type into the search bar the country that you want to link with, and you'll come up with a whole list of schools that you then have to contact yourself in order to try and set up those links. It's a bit more of a trial and error method because there are moments where you might find that you send a message and you don't get anything back, or somebody contacts you but you're not really sure that you want to work with them, or they're not in the right part of the world, or whatever. It's a bit like online dating or something like that. You have to kind of filter people out a little bit, but it is a really, really good way to set up those links, and we created our links with Chad in this way. So those are the two options available to us post-Brexit, because of course pre-Brexit we have the fabulous e-twinning platform, which no longer exists, sadly, and which we cannot use. But if we still have partnerships that we made through that link, then of course those can continue. And this is just an example of some of the work that we've done through connected classrooms at Hazel Primary School, talking about hunger in different parts of the world, talking to experts on food waste, etc., and also putting questions to our MP, John Ashworth, about the problem of hunger in the UK and food banks and things like that, which I think will become an even more pressing and real issue over the next few months. So as a direct result of these partnerships that have been set up, I've now gone back and had a look at our planning, our French planning, and started to look at how I could adapt or create units of work which explore the cultures of the partner countries. So for example, last year, I sat down and planned a unit of work which introduced Year 6 to Senegal and gave them opportunities not just to learn about the culture of Senegal, but also to build their phonetic phonics, vocabulary and grammar knowledge. So we were learning about Senegal. We were recapping clothes and colours and adjective and noun order and agreement and all of those things that the children need to be fairly familiar with by the time they leave Year 6. But we did it all through the lens of Dakar Fashion Week, which is a really big event happening in Dakar every December. And the children recapped the names of the clothes, which they'd already done in Year 5, but they also added in new words which were specific to West Africa. Boubou, which is the kind of quite floaty, big garment that that's worn for special occasions in Senegal by men and women, and also in other parts of West Africa as well. And Moussour, which is the head wrap that you can see on the ladies walking at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So that's one way that language and culture are combined to bring a really rich element to the curriculum, and also to show, in our case, Senegal in a different light than the children might have originally thought of it in. This is a place with huge amounts of culture. This is a place with huge amounts of creativity, and here it is on show. And we also spent some time thinking about West African instruments and learning about music in a second unit, again linked to Senegal, thinking about the importance of the griot, the storytellers of West Africa, how they keep the culture alive, how they keep the stories alive, listening to different instruments and giving our opinions about the music of different instruments, using the partitive article, using our vocabulary of opinion, and explaining why, justifying our opinions using parce que c'est, and giving an adjective to describe. So again, we've kind of got this marriage of culture and language at the same time, which I think is really powerful. And this is something that I'm doing throughout the curriculum. And there are many, many other opportunities in the curriculum now to do this sort of thing. This is just one example. We also, as a school, have decided, and I'm very, very lucky that I have a head teacher who's very supportive of this kind of project. I put to him that I really wanted to kind of create a marriage of art and language. And we came up with the idea of doing Francophone Art Week. The whole school, from reception to Year 6, goes off timetable in the afternoons only. And they learn about an artist from a French-speaking country. They learn about their background, their life, they look at their work, and they use the techniques and inspiration that those artists have to create their own piece of work. Now, reception 1 and 2, they focused on who we might say are more traditionally thought of French artists, Claude Monet, for example. But Years 3 to 6 worked on the works of artists from their linked countries. So Year 3 work on the work of, or are inspired by the work of an artist from Guadeloupe. Year 4 from an artist from Reunion Island. And these are all contemporary artists by and large. So they're artists that are still alive, creating art, creating wonderful pieces today. And it gives children the opportunity to think about what is happening in these countries. These are not countries that they may have thought of before as backwards or whatever. These are countries that are producing incredible works of art. These are countries that are producing, that have great cultures and complex cultures. And we really need to start thinking about that rather than just thinking about one view of how we look at Africa or how we look at South America, for example. They don't just stop these themed weeks, and we have one for Semaine de la Francophonie as well. It's not a celebration of La Francophonie, because I don't think it's something to be celebrated, but it's a marking of that week and giving the children opportunities to make cross-curricular links through geography, through history, through D&T, through music, to parts of the French-speaking world. And each class, again, has a focus country that they work on to learn more about. So these topics and these themed weeks don't just stop at the idea of French being a globally spoken language, but they encourage pupils to explore why this might have come to be. How is it that so many countries in so many different corners of the globe all have the same official language? Does everybody in these countries speak French? Or are other languages present in the everyday lives of the population, and why might this be? So, for example, in Senegal, whilst French is used in the government and in higher circles, if you like, of the country, the majority of people speak Wolof or other languages aside from French. So it's really interesting to think about how language is used in these countries. Can we talk, for example, about Carnival in the Caribbean and Latin America without addressing the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans? Of course, the answer is no. And that's because the traditions of Carnival in the region, from the costumes to the musical rhythms to the instruments, have their roots in the traditions brought to the Americas by enslaved Africans. And this wouldn't just work for French, this would work, of course, for Spanish. Dia de la Lengua Española, for example, on the 23rd of April, could be a really great opportunity to explore and discover more about the Spanish-speaking world. As well as adding new units and projects to my planning, decolonising the curriculum has also meant adapting previous planning to ensure that pupils have the vocabulary that they need to talk about the things they want to talk about. So giving the pupils the appropriate language to talk about, say, hair types or skin colour is really important if children are to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. And this lovely illustration is taken from Maud Warre's West of England presentation at a conference from a couple of years ago, and it shows the different ways for describing different hair textures, for example, and words to give a range of words for describing skin tone. We need to teach the children how to say that they wear a headscarf, for example, or a turban. Okay, in my school anyway. So we need to give those children that language. And Elise Gravel, who's a fabulous Canadian author who many of you may already know, has created a really lovely poster that explains a little bit about different types of hair, and also explains racism in French and in English. Really child-friendly explanations about issues surrounding race and colonial legacies. So all of these things really encourage children to think and to see themselves represented within the curriculum itself. And a decolonised curriculum, as well as all of this, it requires us to examine seemingly well-known aspects of history from a different perspective. And this is what we touched on a little bit earlier on in the presentation. And this is what Maud Warre describes as the elastic band method. So essentially starting with an aspect of history, which the children might already be quite familiar with, and then expanding it out. So, for example, when I was at school, I learned a lot about the First and the Second World War, but it was just through a European lens. So I learned a lot about the war in France and Belgium, and dictators in Germany and Italy, and we looked at pictures of British soldiers in the trenches, but no mention was ever really made of the contribution of troops from across the British Empire, for example. So 1 million Indian soldiers served in World War I and about 2.5 in World War II. And they fought for Britain because at the time they were British. India was part of Britain as a direct result of imperial expansion. And the involvement of men from all corners of the globe who came to fight for what they might have called the mother country is, of course, the reason why we call it a world war. But to the best of my knowledge, that was never made explicit to me at the time. So when we commemorate l'armistice in MFL sessions, which we'll be doing at this time of the year, can we do that without talking about the Senegalese soldiers who fought for France during the First and Second World War? Or can we do it without talking about the contribution of Malagasy troops, for example? And here is an example of some work that my year fours or fives, I think it was fours, did a couple of years ago, where they wrote ID cards in very, very simple French, giving name, age, place of birth of different soldiers from all over the world who fought for France and Britain. And it makes a really nice display if you have time. And it's really kind of a very visual contribution, very visual representation and celebration of the contribution of troops from all over the world. And for the Germanists, of course, this would work really well, bringing together troops from opposing sides and recognizing the sacrifices made by troops from German East Africa, for example, which is modern day Tanzania, who also fought in World War II, World War I, sorry. I think as part of the decolonised curriculum, it's really important as well to shine a light on the cultural achievements of former colonies in spite of the oppression of their colonial past. So, for example, Léopold Senghor and his concept of négritude in Senegal, or artists in Rwanda, or musicians in Venezuela. We need to be making sure that we're really clear that these countries, they're not backwards countries, they're not lacking in culture, in spite of what we may automatically presume. And this is why when we have our Francophone Art Week or our Semaine de la Francophonie, it's really important for them to see visually represented people living in these countries who are creating incredible things. And with this in mind, we've got to be really careful about the images of people or places that we expose our pupils to, ensuring that we don't fall into that trap and those tired tropes which don't represent the current realities of the countries that they claim to depict. So when we show pictures and videos of Côte d'Ivoire, what are we showing? Are we showing this picture of bustling Abidjan with its skyscrapers and all of these things? And in fact, multi-story buildings were present in the Malian Empire between the 13th and the 17th century. So this isn't anything new to this part of the world. Or are we showing them pictures like this one on the right-hand side with children standing outside huts? And this just again shows the danger of a single narrative. It's very well documented, but it is inevitable if we're talking about places that we've never visited. So we don't want to fall back onto those really unhelpful stereotypes. And this is why, going back to the links with our partner schools, this can be so beneficial, because the partner school link helps us. If we've got a question, we can ask someone in our partner school, what's it like? What's this like in Rwanda? What's that like? And also it helps us to create real life links with real life people and not create imaginary things in our head. So I'm just going to, before I finish, suggest a couple of really helpful Facebook groups. I'm sure many of you are members already. The Decolonising MFL Facebook group and the Languages in Primary Schools group. Nathalie Paris has also created at natalingo.co.uk some really interesting videos about the different national holidays and different independence celebrations of various Francophone nations, which is really interesting and might well lead into some interesting discussions with your class, or with your classes, should I say. So in summary, before we go very quickly to questions, decolonising the curriculum in terms of MFL, or indeed any area of the curriculum, involves teachers and school leaders really reflecting critically on what they think they already know, taking into consideration their own points of reference and bias, and being prepared to admit that they don't have all of the answers. Ultimately, it's a question of pluralising, creating greater equality, and designing a curriculum in which all learners see themselves reflected. Because as educators, we should be aiming to create a curriculum which inspires all learners and enables every pupil, no matter what their background or the colour of their skin, to achieve the best possible outcomes. So that's the end of my presentation, but if we have questions, please pop them into the Q&A now. I'm just going to check that there's no questions in there currently. I will just check the chat quickly. Marion has created a collection of German language picture books. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And focus on books by Germans of different family ethnicities. Yes, good. There's lots and lots of nice ideas in the chat. Tricky for German, I agree, Marion, because they are more. It's more European based. Yes, so that one is trickier. So that's why it's good to focus on that diversity within resources. Good. Okay. Any? Oh, we've got one in the question. Good. Fantastic ideas for units of work. Are these available online? Yes. The units of work that I created on Senegal are on my blog, so I'll put that up on the screen now, and they are there to be used, and not all resources are uploaded, but if you email me for any of the resources, the planning's there, I can email out the resources. That's not a problem. That's all there. Lovely. I've answered that. Okay, super. Right. Well, in that case, then, I think we're 1 minute short of the time to finish. I'll just check quickly if there's any more questions in the chat. Oh, lovely. No problem, Hannah. Yes, thank you for your ideas. That was it was a fabulous talk that you gave at forum. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you all again very, very soon. Have a fabulous rest of the day, and yes, I hope you have a lovely weekend and lots of nice things planned. Take care. Thank you so much. If you have any questions that you want to ask still, I'll hang around for a few minutes and you can just pop them into the Q&A. So thank you. Lovely. Thank you, Fiona. You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Susie, yes, good question. Yes, because we as a school don't have an issue with talking about pupil skin colour because it is part of what they look like, if you like just like we would do with their eye colour or their hair colour or whatever. So that's not an issue within the school, and because we have children of so many different ethnicities, it's almost not an issue in the sense that it's not singling out children by their skin colour, for example. I think you have to be careful about the setting that you're in for sure, but if somebody has white skin, they have white skin. So I think it's not, if they're describing themselves and they want to describe their skin colour and they want to have the vocabulary to describe it, we need to provide that for them. Oh, thank you. Thank you in Indonesian. That's fabulous. I'm going to have to look up the pronunciation for that now. Thank you so much. Take care. Right, I'm going to close the meeting in a couple of minutes. So if you have any more questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. Yes, right. Yes, writing content for a company. Yes, it's exactly. I think it's important to talk about the school context. It's definitely something that different schools will address in different ways, and it's definitely a discussion that's worth having for sure. It's a really interesting point, Susie. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. That's absolutely fine, Susie. In Spanish, no, I don't, because I made the one for skin, and the other one for French was from a conference that I went to. So no, I don't know, actually. I wonder if it would be worth doing a quick Google search and see what you can come up with. Or indeed a Spanish speaker would be able to translate it quite easily, I would have thought, and just create the same thing, but with a translation. Yes, Hannah's just said that was from Maud Ware's resources, and she has some Spanish in her talk slides. So perhaps, I don't know, Susie, if is Maud Ware on Twitter, actually? I'm just thinking, Hannah. I'm just going to do a quick search whilst we're speaking. I don't know if she is or not. Yes. Okay, so Hannah said that her Maud's Twitter handle is at prof PROF. Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. That's really helpful. Have you managed to find her, Susie, I wonder? It's really hard when you can't hear people talking. Yes, Hannah said, I think her ALL talk is still available, like ours, via the ALL website, if you remember. I'll just type her name. It's, oops. Let's just put her, there we go. I've just sent her, I've sent her name and her Twitter handle through now. But if you, Susie, if you know the Association for Language Learning, website, if you are a member, or if you know somebody who is a member, then you can get access to that talk through the Association for Language Learning website. Okay. Super. I know it's really weird, isn't it, Susie, not being able to talk. Well, it was lovely to meet you in this bizarre virtual way, and I hope you managed to find all the bits and bobs that you need. Thank you so much for coming. Take care. And thank you, Hannah, so much for your input and your advice. That was brilliant. Right, I am going to shut down the meeting now to make space for the next person. So thank you so much, everybody, and I will see some of you soon. Thank you, Hannah, much appreciated. Let's see if there's anything else in the chat. Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Susie. Take care. Thank you, everybody. See you soon. Bye.